Is there a difference between qualification and discovery? But also, Carol, I know you spoke on why discovery is so important. Can you tell me more about that?
I want to start with this. There's a very old sales saying, which is ABC, always be closing. And I want to flip that around and say what you should be focusing on is ABQ, always be qualifying, because all your deals are going to be closed or lost during the discovery call. If someone is qualified, it makes it for a very easy conversation. It's easy to set next steps. You do a better demo, and it's just a very easier process for you and obviously for your prospect. If you skip or if you do a bad discovery, chances are you're going to lose a deal, especially in those longer sales cycles where you have more decision makers, you need approval from different departments, you don't necessarily know the timing for that prospect. And that's what you need to nail during this process to be able to move forward. This will kill your deals if you don't do it, and it will make your job a lot easier if you do it right.
I see. And I want to know from our audience, do you guys separate qualification and discovery? We have a little poll for you guys here. Let us know, because we're about to dive deep into this. Now, Ross, when we were in the pre-call, I mentioned, I think qualification is separate from discovery, right? I think if you qualify a prospect really well, you're like, okay, now you're worth the time to go into discovery. But it seems you got a different opinion. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I come from a very, very buyer-centric view and believe that the best way to close more deals faster is to make the process as easy as possible for the buyer, which means there's a lot of work you can do up front. When typically, let's say you set, let's like make a real example here. Let's say you set, it's an inbound 30-minute meeting and you're taking that call. There are things that you can do that'll take 5 minutes that'll save your prospect 10 minutes on that call of questions that you can ask them. For example, research, what's their role? What's the company size? You can understand what's their revenue model that probably impacts what they might be buying, for us example, or what's their tech stack. There's tools that you can use to understand these things, to come in and ask. Yes, you're asking questions and you're doing the mix of qualification and discovery, but it's down a much more narrow path where you're basically on call 2 or 3 by the time that you're asking these questions, and you're coming across as an expert who took the time to care about them. And sales, another kind of key concept, the give and get. As soon as you jump on and you're giving and you're asking them these expert level questions versus how many people on your team and what do you guys sell? What's the product? And what's your go-to-market motion? Or what's your tech stack? And you already have those answers. And you're like, how are you solving this key problem that you were reaching out to us for? The conversation is going to go so much further. And in my perspective, imagine they aren't qualified, but you're doing great discovery. You're planting a seed with a potential buyer down the road and really wowing them. You're still committed to that 30 minutes anyway. So might as well come out with those great discovery questions, find out through those if they're qualified, and add more value and be really buyer-centric to that. So that's kind of my take on great qual/discovery initial calls.
I see. Now let's see the results of this poll. Looks like people sometimes separate the two, and usually separate them one over, or actually no, people were actually not separating them and keeping it all in one. Carol, does this surprise you?
You know, I'm surprised at the sometimes, depends on the conversation.
Okay.
And I think that could be a really tricky thing to do, because when you're a sales rep, right, you're selling for one organization, one product, typically one specific type of buyer. So when you're selling to the same audience and your solution doesn't really change, you want to be driving the same process every single time. What does sometimes mean? For me, that's sloppy. And again, it hurts you because if you're doing a different process, depending on the day or the person or what you think is right in the moment, you don't have real data to know what's going to be working, what's not going to be working. And, you know, back to what Ross was just saying with, you know, qualification and discovery, for me, they're synonymous. You cannot have a discovery call if you do not qualify the person as a buyer. You need to understand their needs. You need to understand their timeline. You need to understand what's the cost of inaction, why they're talking to you. You need to get a good understanding of their organization and their problems, but also what's it going to take for them to change and when is that going to happen? It all happens during that call, and you need to be doing the same thing or a very similar thing every single time versus winging it. That's not going to work.
Very true. Very true. If you have a template almost that you can go off of, you know that you'll have consistency every single time. So Russ, how can good discovery happen with research?
Some of what I said before, let's use a specific example again. Let's say you're an infrastructure tool and it's really important what their tech stack is. Again, there's very easy ways to understand that through online tools and research. Looking at their job description for hiring an engineer, they're going to tell you the most important, 3, 5, 7 tech stack things. Coming onto the call with that and asking whether it's qualification or disco, doesn't matter. What they're going to share with you is probably going to be 10 times more valuable because you've done the work up front and you're not a random, salesperson who's trying to, close the deal and win revenue from them. You're a thoughtful expert in this space that has taken time to understand their key challenges and problems and coming with that research. So that's how I think about it, is how am I framing myself to meet this random person who I'm going to try to, make an impact at my company through selling to. I'm going to give a lot. I'm going to give a lot up front to hopefully get something back, right? And if I'm coming on being like, what do you guys do? And what's this thing? And, why are you talking to me? And kind of coming from this place of power, I don't think that's what's going to lead to the best relationships with customers and them opening up to actually get to what Carol was saying, like the heart of the challenges. And really deeply understanding the quantifiable and quantifiable challenges that you're going to solve, which is going to drive the deal forward. That's kind of how I think about a tactical example of doing some great research up front, where I'm now a buyer sometimes, as switching from a sales rep to actually being CEO. And it is crazy where the bar is for sales in these early calls. You're going to stand out compared to the 100 of other reps if you're even doing 5-10 minutes of research and digging into those 1-2 key pieces related to your company. So it might seem overwhelming and changing your habit, but try 1 or 2 key pieces that you're going to bring up before the call, and you're going to completely stand out, and they're going to open up a lot more than you're used to.
Fantastic. Now, I know, Carol, you mentioned in the pre-call that some people can be annoyed when you kind of ask these qual questions, right? In a conversation. You'll be asking like, oh, these are my qualifying. And then the prospect will say, are you trying to qualify me right now? What's a good response to that? What's a good rebuttal when that gets brought up?
I don't find it annoying. And, from myself as a seller, as an AE for 10 years and now selling, for my company, it's not something that I've experienced. And I think that only happens if you ask them in the wrong way. If your tone is, defensive, if you don't feel comfortable, because people can sense it, right? They can sense when you don't feel comfortable or something feels odd to you. If it's a big deal to you, it's a big deal to them. But also, if someone asks, are you qualifying me? I would be honest about it. And I would say, what I'm trying to do is make sure we're a good fit, make sure I'm not wasting your time, make sure this is something that could provide value to you and your organization. And that's why I'm asking you these questions, and then just kind of move on, right? And that's an overall sales tactic you can use in many situations, that when someone cuts you off, when someone objects to something, when, they throw a curveball at you, address it, acknowledge it, and then move on to whatever path you're moving on. For me, qualification and discovery are synonymous. You cannot have a solid discovery unless you qualify the person as a buyer. If they are not a buyer, if they're not part of the decision-making process, if timing doesn't make sense, if they don't have the budget, if they don't have the need, your discovery falls apart. That is part of you understanding everything that Ross talked about, their needs, the prior research, the framing, but the qualification is part of that bigger overall process. So I don't think we should be separating them. Sorry to take a left turn there, but I felt that was really important.